know and admire so much that I don't even have to use notes. I've known Kathryn for many years. I first met her working on the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial. She's the director of the Osage Tribal Museum in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And I urge any of you ever that have a chance to be near Bartlesville or Oklahoma and that neck of the woods to stop in and visit there. It's a beautiful, beautiful museum. It's celebrating its 75th anniversary and is the oldest tribally owned museum in the United States. Kathryn has been director at the museum for 12 years, but she does a lot more than that. As many of us know, sometimes it's that one key person that pulls it all together, that knows everybody. And I've heard it tell quite often, the chiefs are jealous. So she knows people all the way to France. She's done a lot with the French on the early history with the Osage. She helps people in St. Louis and everywhere work on projects that do deal with the Osage, and she's a wealth of knowledge, and I'd like to introduce her and welcome her today. If afterwards we want to do questions and answers, I have an extra mic over there for the questions.
Thank you, Doris. As Doris said, I'm the director of the Osage Tribal Museum, and it is the oldest tribally owned museum in the United States. It was established in 1938. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary, and we had people to come from New York to California, as far away as those places. And it was very well attended, and we had a 2-day celebration, celebrating like they did when they opened the museum in 1938. We had a parade, and we had speakers, and we had a dance and a hand game, and just a little bit of everything to celebrate the Osage culture. Chief John Red Corn is the chief of the Osage Nation, and he has had a very strong interest in cultural survival for the nation and has been very interested in preserving our language. Back when I took over as director of the Osage Museum, we had 5 speakers. And now we have a program, a whole department dedicated just to the language. And over the last 5 years, we have established our own orthography. So that has really helped with the preservation of the language. And right here in St. Louis in the archives, Catholic archives, there was a lot of work done on the language in the early 1800s. And we have the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all translated from Osage, English into Osage. But part of the problem with that was Father Schoenmaker was German, and it's put down the way he heard it, and then we had Father Ponziglione, who translated from Italian to Osage, which we get a lot of different ways to say the words. And then, so anyway, but through all of this, we have managed to survive as a language group. And we just finished a total immersion trip to Colorado Springs. We chose Colorado Springs because in the summertime, that's where Osages always went to cool off. And so the director of the language program said, I think it would only be fitting that we go to Colorado Springs for our total immersion program. So once you get on the bus, you can't speak anything but Osage once you get on. And I said, I think it was kind of a quiet trip up there. But I would just like to thank the St. Charles Historical Society for inviting me today, and to Doris. And as she told you, she and I have been friends for many years. And I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the Osage Museum. The building was built in 1870, when we come to Indian Territory. And we have a collection of over 6,000 photographs and 5,000 artifacts in our collection. This effort was started by Chief Fred Lookout and his council. John Joseph Matthews was a member of our tribe who was an original Alati. And people that were on the roll in 1907, when it closed, we called them Alatis. And there were 2,229. And Mr. Matthews went to school at Oxford in England. And so when he came back in the early 30s, he decided that he got on the council and he said, you know, we really need to establish a museum among Osages. So the council purchased the John L. Bird collection, and they took one of the old school buildings that was built in 1872 and completely dismantled it, put it back together, and built it as a museum. They took out the second floor. But through all of this, I think the reason that we were the oldest museum tribal-owned museum in the United States is because of Mr. Matthews being in Europe, and he understood the importance of museums. And we'll get back into that part in a little bit. And I just wanted to say that with our program, with the chief wanting to preserve the culture, we have the Historic Preservation Office, which deals with, I'm sure you're all familiar with Sugarloaf Mound here in St. Louis. That was one of their first major projects, was to purchase that mound. And then we have our Osage Language Program, and then the Osage Cultural Center, and the Osage Archives, and then the Osage Museum. And all of those programs were under the museum, and in the last 6 years we have branched out to make all those different divisions. And so the chief has set up the Osage Cultural Division, and now we have a division chief, which helps us with all of the things that we want to do. And as you will see at the Historical Society here, there's an Alati exhibit. We started collecting photographs of Osages that were on the roll when the rolls closed, June the 30th, 1907. And there were 2,229 people on the roll at that time. So we started as a project to have photographs of each one of those persons that was on the roll. And I said, I'm not going to be happy till my middle name is Edward Curtis. So, because we have collected 1,500 of those photographs, and we're very proud of that. Another project that we have is the bust. There's Osage busts that were made for the World's Fair here in St. Louis in 1904. And that was of Chief Fred Lookout and of Shankamoa. And so we have, when the first one was given to the museum, the Smithsonian come out and brought that to us. And I said, well, how many of those do you have? And they said, well, they made 10 of Osages. And the others were made in 1914 in Osage on the reservation. So I asked the director, I said, well, how can we have some of those? I'd like to have some more of them. And they said, well, how many do you want? I said, well, how much do you want for them first? So we made a deal and agreed on a price. And I said, well, I want all of them then. And he said, well, okay. I said, I can't pay for all of them today, but I will raise the money for them. It took us 6 years to raise the money. But that's the only place you can see them is at the Osage Museum, because they're all in storage at the Smithsonian. They not only did Osages, but they did other tribes. They did more Osages and more Teton Sioux than they did anyone. But they were all purebloods. that they took facial cast of. And it wasn't only Osages, but Indians, but they took other groups of people like Spanish and French and Irish and just all groups of people. But part of the deal was you had to be a third generation in the United States and be a pureblood. This project was taken to the San Diego Art Museum to celebrate the opening of the Panama Canal. And so some of them stayed out there in San Diego, and then the rest of them were housed at the Smithsonian. So we felt very fortunate to get them, because now the Smithsonian said they won't let any more of them out of their reach, out of their office. So if you want to see any of them and see what they look like, you can see them at the Osage Museum. That's another selling point for coming to our museum. So, and at our museum, we have book signings and art shows. With the book signings, we're getting ready to get a book signing for William Least Heat Moon, who is a Missourian, and he wrote about the exchange, the French exchange with the Osage, which was done in 1827. And we just had a group of French people to visit the Osage Museum. There were 9 in their party, and they wanted a symbol of their Occitan group to be in the United States someplace. So we agreed to set up a monument to honor that relationship with them. And we just did that on Wednesday of this past Wednesday. In fact, they're going to be in my daughter's home tonight for dinner, and I said, I can't be there. I said, I have an obligation that I made a long time ago, and I'm not going to be able to be there. So they'll be eating at our home tonight. And so now we get down to what we want to talk about is treaties. When Doris first called me and talked about this, and she said, well, she said, we're going to celebrate the treaties. And I said, well, now, Doris, I don't know if I can do that. I said, I don't think I can celebrate the treaties. But I'll tell you what I can do. I can come and commemorate them with you. And so, there was the 1808 treaty where we ceded 50 million acres of land. And then there was the 1815, we ceded 1,800,000 acres. And then there was the 1825, where we ceded 45 million acres of land. That was a total of 96,800,000 acres. And for all of those acres of land that we ceded, the compensation was we got $166,000 for it. And that comes down to a penny for every 6 acres. So we'd be happy to buy it back if anybody wants to sell it to us. But so you can understand about treaties and what happened with the treaties. And we were paid back with farm equipment and merchandise. And so we really were short on a lot of things in those treaties. And I did bring some maps here so you can see, if you can see it from back there. But I brought some to pass out. And all of this is what we lost. And we ended up with 1.5 million acres in Oklahoma, in Indian Territory. So when we left Missouri in the early 1800s, we went to Kansas. And then we were in Kansas for many years, and then on to Indian Territory. In Indian Territory, Indian Territory was to become an Indian state. And there was Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory, and they were going to take all the tribes there. So when we got ready to leave Kansas in the 1870, our chief and councils said that we didn't want to move anymore. We didn't want to move ever again. So wherever we went, we wanted to purchase it. And we had a little bit of money left from land, seeding the land. So you'll see on the map that at one time this was Cherokee land. It was Osage land to begin with, and then it became Cherokee land. But when we went back, we had to buy it back again. And we bought 1.5 million acres. And then that comes to a period of time in history. I don't know if you're familiar with Indian allotments and how that worked, but Oklahoma was to be all an Indian state. So, and what they were going to do was to allot each Indian so much land. And then that would kind of solve the Indian problem, so to speak. So when they got ready to do that, as you'll notice in your history, Oklahoma was one of the last states to come into the Union, which Oklahoma didn't become a state until 1907. And the reason was that Osages had purchased that land in Indian Territory. So when they got ready to put everything together, they couldn't do it. They'd run into a big problem because we owned it. And they couldn't do anything. So what they did, they took the western part of Oklahoma and allotted it. To just across the river from us is the Pawnees, Poncas, Otos, Kaws, and some of those tribes, Comanches and Kiowas. There's 37 tribes in the state of Oklahoma. So the 5 tribes and the Osage said, no, we're not going to allot, we don't want to. So they couldn't force anybody to allot except the 5 tribes. And then they couldn't force the Osage, like I say, because we owned it. And they asked, so when they got ready to put the state of Oklahoma together, if you go into your history books, there was 49 from Indian Territory and 49 from Oklahoma Territory and 2 Osages. And they could not do anything until we agreed for them to do that. And it was a major fight because what they did, they took the tribes and they would take each member of that tribe and give them 160 acres of land. And that meant that the little children got 160 acres. A baby got 160, as well as the parents and the grandparents and everybody in the family. And so in Osage, we were the ones that we had the 1.5 million acres, and we said, well, we want every bit of it allotted. We're not going to take, some of the tribes, just each one of them took 160 allotment. But we said, no, we want the whole thing. We still have the tickets at the museum, the drawing tickets, where we drew for our portion of land. And so that way, each person ended up with almost a section of land, 640 acres, a little baby, and as well as the grandparents, each got that much. And if you look at our allotment map, you'll see a person's got maybe 80 acres up here in the northern part of the reservation, and then they might have 160 down here and 80 over here, but it's all allotted out. And it was quite a problem because I'll have to back up just a minute and tell you that When we allotted, there were 2,229 people on our roll. But please keep in mind, when we went over to Indian Territory, there was only 900 full-bloods that crossed over into Indian Territory. So then, that was in 1870. That was 900 people. And by 2,229, there was, by 1907, there was 2,229. It had practically tripled. What happened was they loaded our rolls down. And since they could not force us to allot, the chief, Chief Bighart argued with them. He said, we want every bit of this allotted and we want to keep it in common. We want to own it together. And the government said, no, you can't do that. You're going to have to allot the whole thing. So the way they could force us into it, they loaded our rolls down with non-Osages. And the way they did that, they took, people could come in and they could buy a place on our roll for $50. And the government was involved in it. And if you look at the roll book, I meant to bring one so you could look at it, because some of those people are listed as 128 or 116, I think 128 is the lowest number that's on there. And some of them didn't even bother to put a degree of blood on there. So what they were trying to do was to they figured if they could load our rolls down, that we would have to allot the whole thing. But the chief said, no, we're going to keep the subsurface in common. And we are famous for having the first unitization lease ever drawn up in the United States, because a whole bunch of people own that together. 2,229 shares of the subsurface is owned. But that was just the beginning of all the corrupt things that went on at that time. We had 75 attorneys in our community of less than 5,000 people. And that was just in one little town. That was Pawhuska, and then there was Hominy, and there was Fairfax. And they all had their shares of attorneys too. Because then that's when guardianships come in. If a child, my mother was 9 when her mother died, and so she immediately had a guardian appointed to her, an attorney. And I want you to know these attorneys just help themselves to everybody's money. And when oil was struck in the Osages were the wealthiest people in the world. And so they had, there was a lot of gain for people to be there and to get guardians. And if you look at over in where the area office is, Oklahoma is divided up into two territories. And we have two, what we call area offices. One is the Muskogee area office and the other is the Anadarko area office. And so the tribes are divided up between those two offices. And the Muskogee area office was where most of the oil was discovered first. So there was 300 attorneys in Muskogee at that time. And all the little children got guardians appointed for them. And the guardians just helped themselves to everybody's assets. And it was just a big heyday for everybody. And as some people refer to it as the Great Frenzy. And we are currently working with the New Yorker magazine on an article that's going to come out next year on just on this and all the murders that took place. That was only part of the things that happened. And Doris has the ballet showing at the center down there, and it tells the story of the Osage and what happened through dance. Well, we show it through dance, and I didn't think you could show it through dance, but you can. And some people said, oh, I don't think you should have mentioned the murders in that. And I said, why not? It was a big part of what happened to us. People would come in, and there were ads in the newspaper advertising for coming in and marrying an Osage, so you could get part of their inheritance, and then marry them and then kill them. And I know of one example of a gentleman out in, I use the term loosely, in Arizona, who married an Osage woman, and he murdered her. And he got off, he was walking in his sleep and murdered her. He didn't even know he did it. And it was just, and my grandfather was murdered. My grandfather would tell my dad and his brothers, don't eat anything in this house and don't drink anything in this house, because it's not right. And he wasn't sick or anything, he just died one day. They never had an autopsy done, but there was positive that he was murdered. And there was a mastermind that come in that was behind all of this. He would take out insurance policies. A headright wasn't enough. He had to take insurance policies out too on Osages, and then he would have them murdered. And his name was Bill Hale, and President Truman let him out of prison. And not too long ago, a man called me, and he was the great-grandson of Bill Hale's partner in crime. And he wanted to know when he was going to get his Indian money. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't know if you're entitled to it. I said, you have to have an IM account. Well, I have one. He said, I'm not Osage, but he was another tribe, and he did have one, he said. So it's really hard when somebody like that calls you, and you know that they have money that they murdered somebody for, or their ancestors murdered probably one of my ancestors for, and then they're wanting to know when they can get their money. And so we talked a little bit, and I said, well, I asked him who he was, and he told me. And so he and I kind of exchanged a few words, and I know I wasn't supposed to do that in my position, but I couldn't help myself. So he ended up telling me, he said, I don't ever want to talk to you again. And I said, well, you know what? I didn't call you, you called me. And I said, so, but I gave him another number to call. But these things happen to us and to my people all through the years of allotment. And recently, I was talking to a friend, and she said, well, how did they make these allotments? How did all this happen? What, these treaties? And I said, well, all you needed was a piece of paper and a gun. And she said, oh my gosh. Well, I said, really? I mean, because it was a criminal conspiracy, and the state of Oklahoma, from the governor on down, was involved in it. And I don't know if you're familiar with Angie DeBow and her writing, but Miss DeBow just died a couple of years ago. But she told all about this, and she was writing it, and they told her, said, oh, nobody will read that. And she said, I think they will. Well, she wanted to get it published at the University of Oklahoma. And the University of Oklahoma agreed to publish her book until they read it. And they said, oh, we can't publish this. This is awful. And so Princeton University ended up publishing it. And it turned out that the name of the book is still The Water Runs. And as you know, in most of the treaties, it says as long as the water runs and the grass grows and all of that, this our word is good. And so that was part of what she called it, that book, the name of her book. And when allotment happened, a lot of the kids were shipped off to schools, and a lot of kids went off to school here in Missouri. And I don't know why they chose Missouri, but I guess because it was our homeland. And we had our kids all go to Webster Grove, and a lot of them went to the Catholic boarding schools here. And I know that my mother and her sisters all went to school in Missouri. And there was a Catholic girls' school in Pawhuska, and a Catholic boys' school. And then they just went up to the 11th grade, and then they sent them on to Missouri to graduate. And then the boys all went to the military schools here. So we had quite a time with our allotment period. And I think that one of the things that, you have to keep in mind is that we didn't ask for any of this. It just happened to us. And a lot of times people are jealous of the Osage and the income that we have because they don't think it's fair. But I don't think they thought about what we gave up for what we did end up with. And I think that if I would like to leave one of the roll books with Doris, or send her one, so when you drop by her center down there, you can see what actually happened to us. Would anybody like to ask a question about any of this before? Yes?
It's the program, it says the Osage in St. Charles. How many was in St. Charles?
Excuse me, ma'am. Could you please go over to the microphone? Okay, because...
Oh, she asked how many people were in St. Charles. How many else?
The Osage in St. Charles, and I wanted to hear about how many tribes and how many were down there when Lewis and Clark were here and when everybody else, all about the Osage. And what all did they do? And I've got some books at home.
Could you repeat that, please, Doris?
Way back in the 1800s.
Okay, there was Potawatomis here, and Lakotas, and Sioux. Well, that's where the tribes that where the treaties were signed around the St. Charles area was with these tribes. I'm not sure that they were all here at that time. The Sioux, Dakotas, Kickapoos, Osage, Sac and Fox, and Iowas. Yes, ma'am?
When my husband and I were first married, we built a house at the corner of Pittman Hill Road in 94. And there was an Indian mound about a football field away from our house. And it was on Sanford property. And of course, when we built the house, everybody told us that the Indians were going to come out of the Indian mound and scare us at night. But it was very peaceful. We never had any problems at all.
Yes?
Kathryn, how many Osage are still in residence of Missouri? Do you know? Last I heard it was like 63 or 65. Is that still correct? Or?
It may be. I don't have those figures, but there, of the 2,229, there are about 16,000 Osages from when the roll closed, that are legally Osage.
What is the legality now? Like I think several tribes, if they intermarry, they're considered Kickapoo or whatever. But are the Osage still purists, or have they relaxed the
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because when the rolls closed in 1907, just those people were members of the tribe. And that was just 2,229. And it wasn't until about the 1920s that they rewrote the law where descendants who owned a head right, that's what we call the shares in the tribe, head rights, they could be members too. If they were a descendant from an allottee, they could be a member. And also, we also voted that a person, you say like a person was a full-blood allottee and they had one head right, they had one vote. Say that they died and they had 5 children. Then those 5 children would each get part of that head right, 1/5, and then they voted that 1/5 of a head right. We voted by shares, and that was just the men. The women didn't get to vote until 1943. So in 2006, we redone our laws, and we set up a tribe of people that were descended from the 1906 Allotment Act, and made them members of the tribe if they so desired. But they had to be a descendant, a direct descendant from a member who was on the 1906 Allotment Act. Not everybody chose to do that. And when we wrote our laws, we said that if you were descended from that roll, you could be a member. And you had all benefits of the tribal membership. Then if a person was, say, half Osage and half Pawnee, then they still could have membership in the Osage tribe. But say that the Pawnees did not allow that, then they have to choose whether they want to be Pawnee or whether they want to be Osage. So when we were writing the laws, I was sitting in on a lot of the meetings. And I said, I think that that's unfair to do it that way, because a person should have the right to vote in a Pawnee election as well as an Osage, because I guarantee you that Pawnee gave up as much as that Osage gave up. And they should be eligible for both memberships. But some tribes don't allow that, but the Osage do. I know my grandsons are Penobscot from Maine, and they had to choose what they wanted to be, and their dad insisted that they be Penobscots, and I said, well, whatever, that's fine with me. But as soon as they turned 18, I have 2 of them that are 18 now, and they both chose to be Osage. Yay. But that doesn't get them anything financially until I'm dead. So, and that's bad. Yes.
Have you developed any definite plans for Sugarloaf Mountain?
Yes, we have. In fact, about 3 weeks ago, I had a gentleman call me, and he wanted to give artifacts, 300 artifacts to Sugarloaf, to us for Sugarloaf. And so I accepted them because we planned to build a information center there. And so we went ahead and accepted them. And that's an interpretive center, I guess is what we're going to call it. And that's in the works, but somewhere down the line. So Indians are, one thing I would like to say is that Indians can probably break down fractions faster than anybody, because we're the only people in the world, I think, that you have to be a certain amount degree of Indian blood eligible for different services. Like I'm 3/4 Osage, and so that entitles me pretty much to everything. But if you're, let's see, it's 1/2 if you want Indian preference on jobs in a position in the tribe, you have to be 1/2. If you want educational services, you have to be 1/4. And so there's all kinds of different degrees of blood for different things that the government set up for us. We didn't set those up ourselves. Only the preference for work was the only one that the tribe set up. Yes?
I do have a question. Considering, the Osage in St. Charles, now, the St. Charles County area, they were the most prevalent tribe at that point. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in various books, you read that as the population within the early colonies and then the early United States pushed westward, a lot of the different tribes, in one way or the other, consolidated. They took each other in. How did that happen in the St. Charles area? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so you don't know how that all happened?
No. We are the same language stock as the Kaws and the Ponkas and the Quapaws and Omahas. Because we all pretty much speak the same language. But when we went to Indian Territory, we did give the Kaws their land base.
I see. So it would be more likely to happen if that common language base was there, that there would be a consolidation. If there was a diminishment in one tribal community versus the other ones, because they needed to be a stronger people, in the community. Okay, thank you.
And I had I'm helping 2 ladies that are writing a children's book, and they're from Kansas, and they were writing on Osage and what it was like at Fort, St. Paul, Kansas. And so they started their little book, and when they was reading it to their children, they're using their children's names as the characters in the book. And one of the little boys said, "We weren't very good to the Indians, were we?" and so we've been working on different parts of it, and some of the things that they did not understand about education, because of the St. Paul school there in Kansas. They thought that every day they got up and went to school. And I said, "Oh no, it wasn't like that." And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, they went off to school. When you went off to school, you were there for the long haul. You were there like for 3 years at a time. You didn't go home in the evenings. You didn't go home at summertime, the summer vacation. You didn't go home at Christmas vacations or anything like that. You were there for 3 or 4 years." And so they learned a lot about schools. When just this past, right before I come up here, we were sitting down and talking about the schools. Just like my aunt and uncles went to school at Carlisle in Pennsylvania, and they were gone for a long time. They weren't there. Well, they were there for a long time. And one time I was in Boston, and I was giving a talk, and I was staying with a friend of mine. She was a school teacher, and she said, "Kathryn, would you mind coming to my school and talking to my little kids, the first graders, and telling them about Indians? They'd love to see an Indian." And I said, "Sure, I'll come over." And so I went over, and we were talking, and so they were, I think they were second graders, first or second graders, and they said they wanted to know about little Indian kids and when they went off to school. And I said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. There was some carpet there, little area carpets, and I said, I want part of you on this carpet over here and part of you over here. And you kids are at boarding school. So they said, all right. And so I said, okay, it's time to go home. I rang the bell. So these little kids all jumped up and ran. I said, oh, no, you can't go anywhere. You're here. Well, why not? I said, well, that's the way Indian kids, they had to stay. And so then when I said, well, they said, well, how long will we have to be here? And I said, you're going to have to be here for 3 years. And what I thought was most interesting about this, one of the little boys said, I'd kill myself. And that's exactly what happened. There was a lot of deaths from children killing themselves because the families were separated, and when they went off to these schools, they couldn't speak their language, and it was a process to assimilate and to break down the culture. And when these kids were sent off to school, we still have some of them still in existence over in Cherokee country. There's a couple. And then there's one out in western Oklahoma. And one of the things I think is important to note, that the church has played a big part in the assimilation process, because the reservations in the reservation Indian country was divided up between the churches. Like in Oklahoma, like in Osage, the Catholic Church is very prevalent, and we have a Catholic day school there, a Catholic girls' school, and a Catholic boys' school. And then there were some Quakers there, because our superintendent was Quaker, and we had one Quaker school. But then if you go out west, it's Mormons out in the Navajo area, and then when you go further south to the Pueblos, it's Catholic. Then you go up north to the Dakotas, it's Episcopal. And some of those schools are still run today, and the little kids still go off to school, but not as much as they did back when I was growing up. We didn't, my brothers and I didn't go to those schools. I saw a question back over there.
And I think you've answered my question. I've been to a school, or it was a school in Nebraska, and this is the young children, but the children who may be a little bit older, maybe young teenagers, and they actually were taught things like sewing and cooking, and the boys learned woodworking, and they were all things that assimilated them into another culture,
Right.
outside of their culture at that time. But everything else, they told us it was Indian missions.
Right, and they were all set up as trade schools. They weren't set up as colleges and universities. Yes?
How long did it take before the Indians took the Christians, and were they mound builders? Were they Osage mound builders? And did the Indians take to the Christians then? Right away?
They did. With Osages, they accepted Christianity faster than a lot of the tribes. Well, a lot of the tribes did, because the tribes weren't idol worshippers. They believed in the spirit. And Osages adapted to Christianity really fast because of the spirit. It went in with the way their belief system was.
Were they mound builders?
They were mound builders. So, oh yes?
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
There was a talk about artifacts that were found being donated to a museum that you wanted to set up. And maybe I missed a little bit of part. Where were these artifacts found? Right here off of...
They're from this area.
From this area. So therefore, it Osage and some other, possibly some other like Sauk and some other Indians, or would it be just the, we figured just the Osage?
The man that called me, he said they were Osage, and he wanted to give them to us.
I think it's kind of interesting that other tribes can come in and say, we want a decision that these are Osage. Some of these might be ours. That's what comes, something that I learned from the Army Corps of Engineers. They actually make the decision when you come right down to it.
Right.
So it's really difficult setting up this museum. There's a lot to it.
And that's where historic preservation comes in, in the NAGPRA. We have a situation come up not too long ago in our tribe with the cultural center, because we had remains in the cultural center. And the cultural center director had a problem with that. He said he didn't want the remains in there. And so we had quite a discussion over that. And I said, well, you know, the thing about it is we took some of the remains that we had that come from Harvard that they gave us, and they knew that they were Osage. So when we went to bury those, some people returned them to the Mother Earth. Some people said, well, we need to have a funeral. And I said, no, we don't need to have a funeral. We're just returning them because we didn't expect to have to ever rebury these people. So we did go to Arkansas and reburied them in a state park down there. And the state of Missouri at, tell me what the name? Van Meter. Van Meter set aside an area when Connie was there, set aside an area where we could have to bury our remains there that needed to be buried in Missouri. Because I don't think it's fair to take them out of Missouri and bury them where we are now, myself. That's just my own thought on it. But everybody has thought that you know, how they think we should take care of it. But it was something that new to us that we didn't think that we would have to do, because we didn't think anybody would be taking our remains and putting them on display for people to study. And okay, one.
Whatever happened with the skylight between Marksville, Mound,
In Bartlesville?
Clarksville.
Oh, I don't know.
There was a problem, like in the 60s or 70s.
I'm not familiar with that. But I think that my time is up. And one more question.
About 10 years ago, a man spoke here in St. Charles, and his claim to fame was he was the last full-blooded Osage living. Is that correct?
No. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because out of those people that crossed over into Indian Territory, the 900, there's 2 left. And I think all of those, there's just 2 full-bloods. Excuse me. And I'm 3/4 Osage, and there's only 80 of us left, and the rest of them are. Now, the majority of the membership is 1 2,000 and something degree. So, but they still get full benefits. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
I think This is it. Thank you for coming. Very good program. Thank you.